Okay, good morning. Thank you for your time. We would definitely proceed with what we were doing. In case you followed what was happening extensively, we did start covering, started with definition of concepts, and among the concepts that we defined included history, then philosophy, as well as education. And then we did show the role, the relevance of philosophy to a teacher. That is the relevance which philosophy can play to you as a teacher as well as to education. In terms of definition of education, our interest was to look at various scholars and how they have defined education. In case you missed out that particular class, find time that you go through those parts. Okay. So going by the outline that we gave out, today we'll be looking at, since we did look at aims of education, our next topic should be objectives of education. Did we look at that part? Objectives of education in developing countries. Okay. Then once we are done with that, then we'll proceed to look at types of education. Types of education. Okay, aims and objectives of education, they basically move together. Now, these objectives of education, they are applicable to this particular country as well as many other countries. Okay, they are things which education intends to achieve. Okay. From the aims, we had looked at preservation of culture, isn't it? Preservation and transmission of culture. Okay. We had also looked at providing specialized skills, isn't it? And then preparation for working life. Okay. Those are some of the aims that we had paid much attention to. Okay. Now, among the objectives, the first one is to provide education as a human right. Okay. To provide education as a human right. Basically, we have several topics that we may be able to cover as we proceed, which will help us to extensively highlight the implication of right to education. Okay. So education basically aims at providing, one of the objectives of education in developing countries like ours is to provide education as a basic human right. Okay. Then the second objective that we can be able to cite is education serves as a measure for equality, socially and economically. Okay. Education serves as a measure for equality, socially and economically. What that implies is that education elevates one from their social status to a higher social status, which can make them function productively in society. Okay. So that is those are some of the objectives of education. Okay. Of course, education at the same time liberates us. Education liberates us from our indigenous practices. Indigenous practices, these are inherited traditions that we are born with, okay, which are perceived to be barriers. They tend to be barriers in terms of one's social progress or economic progress. Okay, our traditional practices limits our ability to participate or to function effectively in society. Okay, so education becomes that particular tool which liberates us from our indigenous, what they call uncivilized practices. It is not pleasing though to call our indigenous practices to be uncivilized, isn't it? Because we always associate the word uncivilization to backwardness, isn't it? And that is how they call our indigenous way of life. Okay, it is uncivilized, and then education comes to liberate us from those indigenous practices. Okay, so that is just the picture of some of the objectives. Of course, among other things, education will probably help us escape abject poverty. Okay, education will help us to escape abject poverty, that is high levels of poverty. Okay, education will probably help us to reduce illiteracy levels. All those are some of the objectives that you can be able to cite when you are citing on that. Okay, so these objectives, they move together with the aims of objective. Our intention, or probably our understanding, is that they are all what our education system intends to achieve. So basically, when you go to school as a teacher, that is also what should be in your mind. Like, why am I going to school? Okay, one of the things you'll be going to school as a teacher, probably to those things should be clicking on in your mind. I'm going there to help children get elevated from their current social and economic status. I'm going there to help my learners to escape these uncivilized uh, uh, conditions which they have on the basis of being born in this part of the world. Okay, I'm going there to reduce the levels of literacy. Those are some of the things we should be able to be coming in our minds. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions arising from that? Yes, sir.
It's not really a question, but just from the point of view of the sociological aspect, one argue whether or not education really bridge the gap between poverty
Yes, boss, you can proceed.
and
No.
yes. Um,
Yes.
so from the objectives of education,
Mhm.
it is an argument. Does it really bridge the gap between poverty and success?
Okay, fine. Right. his argument is that is education, can education really end poverty? Or can education transform one's social status from being low, from belonging to low social class to a high social class? Okay, fine. If you want to take chances, you want to gamble, okay, that's a gambling question, my friend, you ask. It's a dangerous gambling question. Okay, fine. If we remove education from the equation, what other alternatives do we remain with for becoming successful? Okay, we can mention them. Witchcraft, isn't it? Stealing, corruption. You get it? Which other method are you going to add to this list? Satanism, isn't it? So which one is the safest? Okay, that's a question you should be able to, isn't it? So most of the majority of people have succeeded. The majority of people have succeeded using the safest method. It has been education. Okay, education as well as hard work, or else they have used scrupulous, dangerous. You get it? I don't know. What is the argument? Maybe I'm talking too much. Do you have a different side of the story? Yes.
Unless activities such as farming.
Okay, fine. Listen. Farming. Is it business? They are all falling under education. You get it?
We should go by the definition of education. You discover that you can't do farming without education taking place. You are not born a farmer. No matter what you have to learn, and the area you have to change.
Other things such as satanism, some other dangerous methods also fund education because one has to be well.
Okay, my friend, listen. When we are defining education, or when we are defining philosophy in particular, our interest was to make us distinguish that, okay. Our interest was to categorically state that in science is verifiable, it is based on facts, it can be proved, it tells you how you're moving from point A to point B, okay. And that is what education is about. In witchcraft or in other methods, okay, how a person is moving from Lusaka to Copperbelt using a spoon and going back within 2 minutes, okay. It is very difficult to explain that. You get it? You can't call that education. Education is very much systematic. How you're moving from A to B to C, you can be able to what to explain. Okay. Do you want to gamble? Okay, fine. Sorry. It is quite important. It is quite important, of course, to have questions. Okay. That's the reason we are in school. We need to operate open-mindedness. That is what we need to have. We need to be to have an inquiry mind. That is the only way we can go to find what is supposed to be done. Okay. We have categorically stated that success, the reason why the majority of people globally, okay, are spending huge sums of money to sacrifice for their children from preschool to university level, okay, you can't be able to doubt that, okay. Can you doubt that? Like, can we assume that the entire millions of people are doing that, are on the wrong side of things? You get it? That's the question you should be able to ask yourself. Okay. It's like The question one scholar was trying to prove, like the existence of God, when he was debating with people who did not believe in the existence of God, and then he was saying, can you assume that the entire millions of people have lived on this planet from hundreds of years ago who tried to, or who believed in the existence of God, can be wrong, and you can be right by saying that God doesn't exist? You see the comparisons. You get it. There's so many people who believes in the system, that the education system leads to what? To success. And the reason the international community, is it your uncles, your aunties, the people in the neighborhood, okay, the church, and the rest of people advocates for improving the standards of education. Okay, get it? If we assume that can we keep our society not educated, let us have a trial, okay, for a period of over 20 years. Let us say we close schools for 20 years, okay. Then we can come and see the results after 30 years. What do you expect to have in society? You'll be preparing for a catastrophe, okay? You'll be preparing for a time bomb, isn't it? An educated society is preparing itself for success. An illiterate society is preparing itself for doom. Okay, that is, I think, it's somewhere in that. We proceed. We go to types of education. On types of education, we'll be looking at trends. We'll be looking at trends which Zambia has passed through from the time before whites came to where we are now. Okay, and in this types of education, we'll look at three types first. That is indigenous education, then missionary education, then colonial education. Those are the three trends that we'll be able to pay attention to. Indigenous education, colonial education, indigenous education, missionary education, then colonial education. Okay. All these types of education are quite relevant, even up to now. Okay. Our interest for the first time will pay attention to indigenous education. What comes into your mind when you hear the word indigenous education? Down there, are we together? What comes into your mind when you hear traditional or indigenous education? Any other? Education which was practiced a long time ago, some time back. Is it not happening now? Eh? It's not happening. Okay.
If to work on education, that's the influence of the whites. Our local education.
Okay, as I've said, indigenous education, though it is said to have been in existence before 1800, because that is the period when the missionaries started coming. We normally say this type of education is still happening even now, and as teachers, we can be able to borrow one or two things from that system of education and apply it in our career. The reason I'm saying it is still in existence, we have so many ladies in here, isn't it? When was the last time you attended Chiranga Muriro? Is it any time last? Yes?
Yes, maybe that's an addition.
Yes.
Indigenous education is
Still happening.
Yeah, in fact, in my culture, we run it like that. We have what is called the initiation ceremony. So I'm also a product of that. So very much happens. And we still use the positive results.
Okay. Okay, that is contribution from the beneficiary of Indigenous education. Okay, fine. Indigenous education basically refers to the type of education which existed before the coming of the whites. But of course, this type of education, some of the elements are still being used even now. Okay. Our interest is to look at three things: the aim of education, the methodology of teaching, who were the teachers. Okay, of course, these will be able to describe basic characteristics of this type of education. Aim of education, methodology, curriculum. What else? Is it aim of education, curriculum, methodology, teachers? So we begin with the aim. The aim of education for indigenous or traditional education was to preserve and transmit culture. Okay. Which of course we have seen in our general aims of modern education, isn't it? Preservation and transmission of culture. That was the general aim. In terms of, in this type of education, the entire community was responsible for teaching the young ones. Okay. And then elders were responsible for teaching young ones, isn't it? I know some of you may have that exposure. Usually, men would sit, what do they call it? A hut for men, isn't it? Then ladies, they'll do their business in the kitchen, isn't it? And then from time to time, there may be social gatherings and moral narratives or stories will be told to young people. Okay, that is how this type of education basically happened. In terms of the curriculum, of course, what constituted the curriculum for Indigenous education? We are all familiar with that, isn't it? Can we be active and participate and learn from each other? Yes, my friend. The product. Yes. What constitutes part of the curriculum for that?
Yes, well, as you just earlier stated, the entire community is really part and parcel of the process. Yes, they really also play a part in making the ceremony a success. So usually it's the elderly that are more like the powerhouse of the curriculum.
Okay.
The elders.
The elders are the powers of the curriculum, isn't it? Okay. What other things? Are we Zambians? Start doubting. There's no harm even if you are coming from our neighboring countries, one Africa, isn't it? Okay. The curriculum, of course, includes morality, okay, good behavior, laws, okay, as well as respect, manners, okay. Is it hardworking? Okay. Honesty? Is it welcoming? You know, Zambia is known to be a very, what do they call it? The most welcoming country. They are very good receptionists. Okay. That is rooted in what? In our own tradition. Okay. All those elements are rooted in our own tradition. Respect for elders, hardworking, okay. Good manners or morals, then working together. Okay. That is what constitutes indigenous or traditional education. Now, if you look at these elements that I've highlighted, we can't say that they cannot be used, even activities. You get it? You see it, there are so many assignments they're giving you, isn't it? Some assignments that the teacher will not even announce. You just give you, oh, these are group work assignments. Okay. You just think I think Versailles is just lazy. He just doesn't work to mark individual. Okay. It is part of learning how to work together. Okay. The group assignments they give, which teachers give to learners, is part of teaching teamwork. Okay. How can people handle different characteristics? Maybe if they're working together. Okay. That was part of indigenous education. Respect for elders, that is ever emphasized, isn't it? In our communities. Okay. Hardworking. Yes. Of course, skill acquisition. Girls have got their own skills they are taught. Of course, things to do with kitchen work. Okay. Norms are part of the values which are imparted. Okay. Can we cite specific norms for people to understand what we are trying to talk about? What norms do we have from our own cultures? Yes. Respect. Yes.
Okay, on norms, I think that's to add on norms, we are taught a specific perception of the opposite gender. So that will not fall under good manners.
To find out bad manners. Okay. Okay. Norms are part of the curriculum. Okay. Norms are part of the curriculum. But of course, we have a diverse culture in this country. Okay. And each particular region has got their certain norms which they tend to uphold. Okay. We understand in this part of the country there are some people who were being allowed to marry cousins. Some people who were being allowed to marry more than one wife, isn't it? Different parts of our country has all these norms which they believe in. Okay. But of course, with modernity, some of these have been. Our interest is to look at the positive side of our traditional education: respect, cooperation, hard work, okay, obedience, good manners, skills acquisition. Boys were being taught how to hunt. How to hunt was meant to enable a man feed for the family. Okay. Which tribe are you coming from, madam? Bemba. Is it true that monkeys were a part of the dish? No. We don't eat that. I have never eaten that. Okay, all right. So that is on indigenous education. If they give you a question, use as many practical examples as possible or characteristics to describe what this type of education is. We talked about the aim, we talked about the methodology, we talked about the curriculum. In fact, one of the methodology for teaching was what was called indoctrination. Indoctrination meant brainwashing you. Okay, you know what is to brainwash? Where you're supposed to just accept what they're teaching you without any questions. Okay. Indoctrination implies teaching you where you're not supposed to ask questions. You're just supposed to believe what they have taught you. Okay. And some people still are using some of those teachings. Okay. I may not need to mention some of them because they may not be appropriate, isn't it? Okay. Okay, we can use some of the practical examples which are very favorable. Okay, why is it? It was a very serious offense for if a family has cooked a chicken and the father has not, someone apart from the father has eaten the gizzard, isn't it? Why is it so important? Does it even carry any significance? Any justice?
Because of what has been attached to that.
But is it necessary that only the father should eat that?
We are learning that each and every type of education or with objectives, right? So even the indigenous education has got its own objectives.
Okay.
So in achieving its objectives, that is part of the and if you go deeper analyzing that, you discover that yes, it does.
Okay. And kids will be taught that once you eat this, your hand will stop growing. Okay. And they'll believe that. You get it. There are so many, that is what is called indoctrination, where they teach you something and you take it as gospel truth. You can't question it. Just in case that this time someone can say, since they are selling them in ShopRite, I'm going to buy in bulk so that I eat them and see on whether something is going to you get it. It's like what? It's like a myth. Yes, indoctrination is there are myths, but people used to grow with that. Okay, and that is what characterizes indigenous education. Okay, we move away from that. We come to missionary education. Okay, now missionary education is beginning in 1800 to 1924. 1800 to 1924. And then even in it, we are going to look at three things: the aim of education, 1924. We look at the aim of education, then the curriculum, the teachers, and just general characteristics. Okay, missionaries, as we know, they came to preach the gospel of Christ, isn't it? So the aim of education was to preach the gospel. And stealing. Why do you say so? Can you justify? How can you say the holy people who liberated us to go to heaven, they came here to steal? Are you in order?
You find that when they came during this period, African, that's when was being discovered. And their interest was more on our resources than the education they were giving us. So it was more like they are giving you bread so that they can get from you diamond. Every day, making sure that you eat bread and then they're getting diamond. Not making you realize how diamond important it is. But through it, you can buy a lot of law. You can buy many laws and you can build. They never wanted to make that life in with you.
Okay. Karen, it's
So they took advantage of our respect for God. They capitalize on that.
It was not their fault. It was not their fault. Okay, fine. Listen, you had gold and diamond, and then they had bread. Okay, you wanted bread, they wanted diamond. Now we are blaming them that they were supposed to inform us that your diamond is better than my bread. Now that deals with it. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. What we have in history is that missionaries introduced Western education. Okay. They introduced Western education as we see it now. This education that we are using now is a product of the missionaries. Okay. Now, their priority in terms of the aim of education was evangelization. Evangelization as well as preaching about morality. Okay, remember, morality, we already had our own moral values when they came. Okay. So when they introduced their morality, it was very easy for us to cope up with it. In terms of their teachers, they came with highly qualified teachers. Okay, these are people who are coming from Europe, but of course along the way they picked some people they trained in South Africa who became interpreters. So those were among the first teachers that we had in our country. Okay, in terms of the curriculum, we are teaching basic literacy, which is reading, writing, and speaking. Reading, writing, and speaking. Speaking, that is speaking the foreign language. Okay. In terms of the skills, they also taught skills, some skills which included typewriting? Is it carpentry, tailoring, as well as agriculture? Okay, like basic skills for the indigenous people. Now, what we have been told also is the fact that as these missionaries set up their schools, missionaries also started having kids in this part of the world. Some of them, of course, were traveling with, uh, with, uh, their spouses. So, and of course, when we start looking at the age range, these guys were just in the age of 24 years, 25, almost like young men, isn't it? There's no way you can expect them to come to Africa and live the entire life without having children. So they started having children. As a result, these children were required to go to school. Okay. So the system of education which was in place, in fact, during this time, that is when we have the beginning point for having a parallel education system, one for the whites, one for the blacks. Okay. Of course, with schools for the whites being highly funded or highly equipped as compared to the ones for the blacks. The blacks were being trained these skills: agricultural, tailoring, typewriting, as you were saying, that so that they can be prepared to come and serve the white administrators who were going to come. Okay, so that is what happened in the education system at the time. We've talked about the aim of education, we talked about the curriculum. Now, we haven't talked about methodology. The methodology was memorization or rote learning. The methodology of teaching during colonial period was memorization or rote learning. Can you remember type of learning? Okay. I think the missionaries found it easy to teach Christianity. You know the reason? Because we've already talked about indoctrination in indigenous education, isn't it? Where people they already had that mindset of believing. Okay, isn't it? So when the missionaries came with their story about Jesus and the angels, it was very easy for the black man to capture, to understand, isn't it? Okay, all right. We may need to talk about some individual missionaries and their contributions. Among them, we have Frederick Arnott. Frederick Arnott was the first missionary to come to northern Rhodesia, and then he probably entered through what is called Western Province. Okay, Frederick Arnott. Arnott. Okay. Then he opened a school. The first school, probably the first mission school under the name, is it Christian Mission to Many Lands? That is in Western Province. Western Province, CMM, yes. Then was later succeeded by a man called Franco Scoilard. He was later succeeded by another missionary by the name of Franco Scoilard. Of course, these young people, for them to decide to come to this part of the world, they came here after David Livingstone. You know, David Livingstone was an explorer. The difference between missionaries and explorers is that David Livingstone was an explorer. When he came to this part of the world, then he took them up to United Kingdom. A lot of people had interest in studying where I had gone. Okay, so that is how these individuals started emerging, because they had interest in seeing what David Livingstone had seen. So the first one is Frederick Arnold, then Franco Scoilard. Then we have some other missionaries by the name of John Fell, who opened a training institution in Kafua Gorge. Okay, so those are the three major missionaries and what they have contributed. John Fell. John Fell.
The training institution they opened was what?
Training institution, should have been a teacher training institution in Kafua Gorge. That is in 1918. Okay. I think we're done with missionaries in terms of their characteristics, beginning with the aim of education, the teachers, the curriculum, and the methodology of teaching. Okay. We proceed. We go to colonial education. So colonial education is beginning. Colonial education is beginning in 1924 to 1963. Okay. 1924 to 1963.
Sorry,
Yes.
you say usually education started
1800 to 1924 or 1923, we can say. Okay, then we go to, okay, all these notes will be given to you. And in addition to that, we're having our lesson recorded. So you may have, in your free time, listen to what could have transpired. And in addition to that, you have notes in your own book. So unless nangfira kosa ngafya kosa mu book kuya kuli mode Yakosa kuri module kwisa kuri nani kaya. Kuri recording. Isn't it? If yakosa kuri recording ni shari shupa. Everything. Okay, fine. So we proceed. Colonial education. Colonial education, as we have said, from 1924 to 1963. Of course, we are aware that the missionaries came to lay the foundation for the colonial administrators, isn't it? Now, during colonial education, the main aim of education was political domination. The main aim of education was political domination. Political domination, alienation, and assimilation. The main aim of education was political domination, assimilation, as well as alienation. So meaning that the colonial administrators, they provided the type of education which will make blacks get ruled or get controlled. The reason they call it trust philosophy. Trust philosophy. It's TUSCKES. They call it task philosophy, saying in this type of philosophy, education was going to be continued being offered by the whites to the blacks as long as the type of education which they are being offered was not going to be used to rise against the whites. Okay. It is very simple. The saying, the whites were willing to continue providing education to the blacks as long as the type of education the blacks were receiving was not going to make them rise against the whites. Okay. It's a very simple thing. Okay, why should I come here to teach you something which can make you attack me and kill me? Get it? You see the logic. So the whites were ready to continue training the blacks or offering education to the blacks as long as the type of education they were offering them was not going to make them harm the blacks. Okay. Yes. I mean, harm. And generally, as we have said, that the aim was political domination. We are teaching them to comply, to be good servants, okay, to be obedient, to be the type of education which is like a master servant type of relationship. And we've seen a lot of characters from that age. Okay. Some of those characters, you meet them in the industry and you don't just, they behave so funny, isn't it? A lot of people have emerged from that type of education, isn't it? Okay. Now, our interest is now to look at the type of education which existed. They're saying there are two types of education which existed during missionary education. There are two types of education, and this two type of education is what is called the binary type of education. It is called binary type of education. It implies there was one education system for the whites and one education system for the blacks. Okay. Binary education system implies there's one education system for the blacks and one education system for the whites. Of course, that being said, it implies the education system for the whites were meant to train professionals, and then the education system for the blacks was meant to train the black people on how to be good servants. Okay, and then you expect that even the quality of materials or education standards could not be the same in terms of the two systems of education. Okay. So that is probably what characterizes that type of education. Now, in terms of the teaching methodology, again, it was memorization, just like in missionary education. Yes, questions? The education system which was meant for the whites was
The methodology.
the same that it was meant to train professionals. It was meant to train those who are going to take over leadership. Okay, so you expect that for them they had advanced methods of learning. Okay, where they would teach them critical thinking. Okay, rather than memorization. You get it? Probably would teach them problem solving as opposed to memorization. Okay, amepusho mafunzo maswali. Yes. Binary system of education, which implies one education system for whites and the other one for blacks. Binary implies two. Okay. If there are three types of education, they would have said was what? Was triple or quadruple. I said binary. If one is for blacks, one should be for the whites. Okay. Yes. Eh?
It was the binary type of education, so there was one for blacks and one for whites. The one which was for the blacks, it was the methodology used was memorization. Then the one which was for whites, the methodology was to do with critical thinking because they were preparing them to take over leadership.
We're talking about, he was talking about two types. One is binary, now we're waiting for another one.
Binary meaning
Yes,
Two.
meaning that the binary.
Did you do mathematics? Did you do binaries? How was it? Okay.
Zero, that one.
Hmm. Okay, so we're still in colonial education. So we're okay. Okay, we proceed. We look at we look at we look at the other elements of colonial education. The saying colonial education was managed according to the Phelps-Stokes Commission. Okay, in fact, it was managed according to the Native School Declaration and the Phelps-Stokes Commission. So our interest is to have a brief knowledge about what constituted the Native School Proclamation and then the Phelps-Stokes Commission. Okay. What they call, so we begin with Native School Declaration, Native School Proclamation, Native School Proclamation or Native School Declaration. Native School, Native. Native implies what? When they say native, they imply local, like okay, like indigenous. Okay, so in 1918, the Native School Declaration was made. Okay, is it now this declaration? The declaration was meant to guide. The declaration was meant to guide. The declaration was meant to guide education administration in Northern Rhodesia. Okay. Now, we look at the contents of that declaration. So the declaration, among the contents, one says the registration of existing schools, the legislation of existing schools was to be done within 3 months after the declaration was made. Registration of schools was to be done within 3 months after the date of declaration. What did that mean? It implied it was like a policy which was being passed in terms of how education should be managed. Okay, now, second, no new school was to be opened without the consent. No new school was to be opened without the consent of the administrator. No new school was to be opened without the consent of the administrator. Now, the administrator in this case was these representatives acting or controlling Northern Rhodesia on behalf of the British government. Okay, so those are the administrators we are talking about. So they, after assuming the responsibility of political domination, they also took over the administration of the education system. So it is the first time we are having any government policy in place to start managing the affairs of the education system through the Native School Declaration. Okay. All right. So they have given us that existing schools were to be registered within 3 months after the registration, after the declaration was made. Then we've also said, new schools was not to be opened unless a consent letter was sent to the administrator of the territory. Okay, that is just one particular. So those are the two parts. The third part. Now, before we go to the third part, you probably know that even this time, you don't just wake up and say, I've opened the school, isn't it? What will happen to you? You'll come and close, isn't it? So what we are looking at is for us to understand what is happening now. Okay, where does it come from? Okay, how did it come about? Okay, so those policies have been extended after that period. They have been extended up to this particular period. Yes, sir. Okay. We proceed. Okay, I think it's good. We proceed. Teachers. Okay. That is number 3. Okay. The administrator was responsible for prescribing who was supposed to be a teacher. Okay. So the administrator of the territory was the one who was supposed to appoint anyone who was supposed to be a teacher. And then the requirement for that teacher was as follows. A teacher was to be married and living with a wife. Okay. So that is what we have. They haven't said that the teacher was supposed to be married and living with her husband, isn't it? They have said supposed to be living with the wife. So meaning that teaching was a male job. Okay. And there are reasons why do you think they recommended that the teacher was supposed to live with the wife? What could have been the reason behind that requirement? Yes, sir.
During that time, this time around, education was mainly for boys. Girls were staying home.
Okay, boys girls were to stay home, isn't it? Okay. So the argument, I don't know what the argument was. You are very right.
Because you cannot have a teacher who was just staying home. How can you keep it? The boys would learn. From there, others would be
Okay, so that is what we are learning from the Native School Declaration. Okay, those requirements. I think we can still take some 10 minutes so that we are done away with the types of education. Once we come in the next class, we'll be doing something to do with Western education. So the last trend of within these types of education, we can talk about the Phelps-Stokes Commission. Phelps-Stokes Commission. Remember, I did say that colonial education was conducted according to the Native School Declaration, the Phelps-Stokes Commission, as well as the Tuskegee philosophy. I've already explained what Tuskegee philosophy is. Okay, so now we take a brief look at Phelps-Stokes Commission. Phelps-Stokes Commission. Phelps-Stokes Commission. Yes, P-H-E-L-P-S. And Stokes, that is S-T-O-K-E-S. Phelps-Stokes Commission. Now, what you hear to be Phelps-Stokes Commission, actually, Phelps-Stokes is the name of a lady. Her name is Caroline Phelps-Stokes. Okay, it's the name of a woman, an American business lady, wealth woman, who had interest in improving the quality of education in this part of the world. Okay, like the current donors that we have, we know that just that COVID-19 has taken them, isn't it? Aid has stopped coming to Africa. Did you know that? The donors have died. Okay. Now, this idea of sending why you are it. This idea of sending money or resources to Africa is not beginning now. Okay. It began as early as way back. So Phelps-Stokes Commission in 1924 Caroline Phelps-Stokes in 1924 set up what is called a commission of inquiry. And this commission of inquiry is what was later called Phelps-Stokes Commission. Okay. So the commission was named after the lady who funded it to be conducted. Okay. So the saying she was American, and then she had interest in improving the quality of education for the indigenous people in northern Rhodesia and other parts of Africa. So that is where we have this commission now. So the commission was set up, and then it comprised of, let's say, 15 members of the General Mission Conference. When you hear General Mission Conference, this is a conference for missionaries. The conference which the people had, these clergymen who had established their mission stations in Zambia belonged. Okay. So the commission comprised of those 15 missionaries, that is from Protestant as well as Catholic representatives, and the representatives of the colonial administrators. So they are the ones who made up that commission, and they were given 2 tasks or 3 tasks. One was to identify the educational needs of the indigenous people. Okay. Then 2, to identify the areas in which these needs were being met. Okay. And 3, to identify what can be done to achieve, to respond to these needs, that is the educational needs which the indigenous people had. So this commission made the deliberation and later on came up with recommendations. Okay. First, identifying the education needs of the indigenous. Second, ascertain the extent to which these needs were being met. And then third, ascertain how these needs can be met. What can be done to respond to the educational needs of the indigenous people. All right, so that is what transpired. Now, so the commission met and they made recommendations. So among the recommendations, you need to have just basic knowledge about these things. Among the recommendations was to increase funding to the education system. Okay, and that funding was supposed to be done by the state. Okay, and then second, to set up a central mission school basing on geographical basis. To set up a central mission school so that people from different villages can be meeting where they can learn. And third, to establish a coordinated educational system which should be controlled by the General Mission Conference members. Okay, so you find that missionaries had interest also in managing the education system. They wanted the politicians to leave the control of the education system to the missionaries because they were experts in that. That is what we are learning. Then they also advocated for increasing funding for visiting local teachers, okay, or visiting teachers into villages, okay. Of course, like the current policy that we have what is called the rural hardship allowance, isn't it? So these things that you see in the education system, they were there even from way back. They just change words, okay. They just change words for when new policies are being introduced. We talked about, okay, this time we have the teaching council, isn't it? You can't go to class without a teaching certificate, isn't it? It will be a very serious offense. They will fine you. You have to pay. The same was applying during the native school declaration. If they find you teaching, you're not qualified, you'll be punished. Okay. So most of the things which happened during those early stages, those are the same things that we are able to be experiencing this time as in the education system. That is the whole entire purpose. We need to know what is happening in the education system. Where do they come from? What do they signify? Okay, we all have that connotation. Okay. Do you have any questions? Sure. Questions? Mafunso.